All right, welcome everybody. My name is Benjamin Tegeler. I'm an ecological designer with Ozark Mountain Permaculture. It's a permaculture and ecological design firm here in Springfield, Missouri. And this is food forest and edible forest gardens. We're going to jump right in. As Hannah said, special thanks to the USDA and the Springfield Community Gardens for hosting this free workshop. Pretty awesome information. I got a lot of stuff for you. So buckle up, and if you have any questions at all during the webinar, just chime in the chat through Zoom, and Hannah will bring that up, and we can talk about it right then and there. Usually lead more discussion based kind of workshops, and that's kind of hard to do on Zoom. So I've never done this presentation through webinar, so bear with me. We have a lot of material to cover, and a lot of different things to get the gears going. So if you have a question, feel free to reach out, because I'm sure a lot will come up. So again, I'm Ben Tegeler. I've been doing permaculture for 10, 12 years now. Started Ozark Mountain Permaculture in around 2016. I also do ecological design work for Custom Foodscaping, a foodscaping company in St. Louis. And I do a lot of urban planning work and things of that nature as well. My schooling and education, I have a degree in community and regional planning, and then kind of went the permaculture path after that of regenerating neighborhoods and cities, and bigger scale, and then at the same time the homesteads and farms, and just designing and implementing regenerative systems and whole systems. So these are my inspirations for food forests. There are hundreds, if not thousands of more, including all the indigenous ancestors of this land and many other lands, aboriginals. A lot of our ancient humans, I think, lived more in tune with this planet, and managed their forests and ecosystems with reverence, and created food through that without destroying the ecosystem itself. But some of these that I follow, Martin Crawford, Eric Tonesmeyer, Robert Hart, the Bullock brothers, and Michael Phillips. Michael Phillips is of the Holistic Orchard. And then my all-time favorite, Dave Jackie, has the textbooks Edible Forest Gardens, Volume 1 and 2. We'll get that in the resources. But any more research on food forest topic, this is where to look, and the kind of the beacons of light for that system. So usually when we're in person, we do a little exercise and do a walkabout and kind of do an observation exercise, but we don't have that ability here. So I want you to imagine that you're entering a forest or a space, a really wooded space that you can remember, that you enjoy, and you're walking into the forest, you're entering it, and I want you to think about who planted it, who waters it, who maintains it, who's weeding, who's mowing, who's doing all this things. And then hopefully that realization would come that it's almost a self-regulating entity. It's a diverse web of life that doesn't have maintenance, and it creates its own inputs, and it is constantly succeeding itself and planting new trees and new shrubs and new ground covers, and providing habitat for animals and deer and wildlife and every such thing. So before we get into the food forest, the reverence and learning from the native ecosystems that we have here. So keep that in mind of we're entering the forest, and that's our main teacher here. That's my daughter. So what naturally grows here? So we're in Missouri. I don't know where everyone else is on this poll or on this Zoom chat. That might have been a good poll question, Hannah. But Springfield, Missouri, what naturally grows here? We're in an oak savanna ecology. So the main forests are oaks and hickories, and then everything comes under that. There used to be American chestnuts, but things that grow well are apples, hazelnuts, mulberries, the prunus species, plums, cherries, peaches, persimmons. What do you see when you go out in the woods? What's growing? You might find some wild persimmons or wild pawpaws, or wild ginger or wild ramps. So we want to learn from what naturally wants to grow here and not try to reinvent the wheel. We're not going to try to grow citrus here yet, maybe in 10, 20 years. But a big thing is cut out the fluff and identify what naturally wants to grow here. Take that visit to the forest and explore and see what is growing and mimic it or replicate it with maybe some high species cultivars. This image to the right is a swamp white oak. We call them grandpa oaks when they get that big, but the oak is usually the dominant player in our ecosystem, and it sets the tone for every other species that comes about.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
Somebody in the chat, Madison, said, I'd love those permaculture people to follow listed out again.
Yeah, I'll go back real quick. Martin Crawford, Eric Tonesmeyer, feel free to take a screenshot. This is recorded, and we can send out a PDF of the presentation if that is beneficial as well. But Dave Jackie's here in the U.S., Eric Tonesmeyer, Michael Phillips is in New Hampshire, Bullock Brothers are up in Washington State near the Canadian border. Martin Crawford is overseas in England. I'm not sure where Eric Tonesmeyer is these days. He was in Massachusetts for a while, and Robert Hart's over in England as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, the one who plants trees, knowing that he or she will never sit in their shade, has at least started to understand the meaning of life. That's Rabindranath Tagore. And when we're planting these systems of food forests, you're planting an oak that could live for 300 to 600 years, or a chestnut, or a hazelnut that can live for 1,000 years plus. So these are very intergenerational systems that not would only benefit you, but your family, your successional generations, your great-great-grandchildren, and then all the successional generations of the robins and blue jays and deer and turkey and anything else that would be alive in your system. So we're nurturing the entire web of life by planting in this way. Another quote that is a favorite of mine is from Wendell Berry: "The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility." So we are stewards of the land. I could go into a lot of depth of what's wrong with our current system, but I'm going to focus on where to turn from now and focusing on solutions.
Speaking of that, Ben, we have a question in the chat from Janice. The experts highlighted looked all like white men. How can we make permaculture more accessible and equitable?
Sure. I mean, these are the cats that are doing it here, mostly North America and England, and have the most dialogue that I resonate with, just because of language and things. There's people in New Zealand. There's lots of people in Africa and different cultures and all sorts of things in the Middle East. I mean, this is just the ones that have written text in English that I can read due to cultural and language barriers. There is no shortage of diversity, I think, in the permaculture ecological world of users, and maybe in educators. It's still, the white guy on picking apples or whatnot. But like I said at the beginning, the real teachers for all this was the ancient and indigenous ancestors, the Native Americans on this land, or the Aboriginals, or the Amazonian tribes, and those sort of things are the real teachers. And we've stepped so far out of the natural loop that we need to reintegrate in all ways possible. So learn where you are and utilize the teachers that are present and become those teachers. I think there's all sorts of ways to get diversity and education to this, and this is a part of it, is learning and taking that step and spreading the word. So Did I answer that, Hannah? Is there any more?
Yeah, yeah, that was great.
So what are we going to discuss today? We have a lot, so buckle up. We're going to touch into what is a food forest or edible forest garden. We're going to talk about the layers of a food forest. We're going to dive into the permaculture design process and site assessment. That can be a little complex and overwhelming, but I'll simplify it after. We'll talk about guilds, polycultures, and plant selection for the Ozarks, establishment and getting started, maintenance and planning for succession, and recommended resources. So we're going to learn how to basically transform your yard or your farm and mimic the structure of a natural woodland and create food forests and edible forest gardens. So what is a food forest? A food forest is a purposeful, integrated system of interplanting, mostly of perennial fruit and nut trees, bushes, shrubs, herbaceous perennials, natives, food, medicine, fuel, fiber, the list goes on. We want to mimic the natural woodland ecosystem, but with an emphasis on products that benefits humans and all forms of life. So I could go into the woods and find a wild persimmon, or I could plant a Japanese persimmon or a persimmon cultivar and get a more commercial fruit crop, you know, where I'm going to get a lot of fruit rather than kind of the small quarter-sized persimmons you'd find in the woods. So we're mimicking, we're not planting an exact ecosystem, we're planting something that's going to give us lots of fruit and lots of medicine, all focused mostly on perennial foods. And perennial just means that it comes back every year. So, you know, tomatoes, an annual, you'll plant it once and then it'll die and you'll have to restart a seed or buy a transplant and plant it and water it and weed it and prune it and take care of it and train it and keep going and going, compared to a tree that you can plant and manage for a couple of years, and then after that it's off to the races and will be around for hundreds of years if done right. The food forest is good for property under 5 acres. Larger than that, we can move into more restoration agriculture and agroforestry. So to sum it all up, we're taking the forest and how the forest operates as an ecosystem and applying those principles into our yards and gardens. This is kind of an overview of the different types of cropping systems. Over on the right, we have annual cropping. You can see there's no diversity, there's no life. It takes input, CO2, it takes diesel for tractors. You know, this is on a bigger scale and it, you know, is not very sustainable. And then we move to animal husbandry and pasture management, silvopasture, where we plant trees with animals in between, alley cropping, where we plant orchards with corn or soy or, you know, zucchini or whatever crops in between. And then we start getting more into the natural processes. So these are more agricultural systems, and we start trying to mimic those natural processes of actually how nature operates and how forest operates, and how we can plug into that and design our systems to be more in tune with natural processes and get those benefits as well. So we're right here with food forests. You can see it does take some inputs to get started, but once you get going, hopefully we get this weld of species and diversity to help move us along to act like a forest and get those functional, get the functions of it. So what does a forest have that our gardens usually don't? They have outrageous diversity, in the words of Michael Phillips of the Holistic Orchard. Diversity is the key. So forest gardening is all about stacking layers and functions to create resilient, productive systems. And once established, really needs minimum input. That establishment phase is usually longer than people think. You know, I know there's a lot of people, if you're familiar with food forests, that I'm going to plant a food forest and there's no work and no maintenance and no inputs and it's going to be great. It's a lot of work. Just out front, you have to really think about your maintenance long term and, you know, the next 10, 20 years, because you're planting very long-lived species for the most part. So we want to stack those functions. We want to occupy every space. Nature will fill the space if we don't Yeah. So when we're talking about living forests and webs, we got a diversity of organisms and insects and soil and fungi and just everything in it is interconnected and working with each other. The tree is dropping mulch and building soil and feeding the mycelial network of fungi and microorganisms and harvesting water and sponging and sequestering carbon and providing pollinators and caterpillars and birds and bees, and the list goes on up to, you know, deer and turkey and black bear. So the forest is a self-regulating system that's really what we're trying to get, is how do we design our gardens, our edible forest gardens or our food forest, to essentially act like that. So what are the benefits of food forests? It's mostly perennial and it's intergenerational. It takes full advantage of vertical space and fills those gaps and niches. And we plant the perennials once. So once we plant them, we don't have to go back and continue planting. We don't till. We're not disturbing the soil. We're not creating that many disturbances. So we're having a healthy soil ecosystem, and we're providing perennial habitat, and we're minimizing our labor severely. So these ecosystems can be tended for thousands of years. Yeah, and the perennial plants don't have to be just trees and shrubs. There's also many perennial vegetables and perennial pollinators and things of that nature. So with the perennialness, if that's a word, we have reduced or no watering. We can have high productivity and year-round harvest and different harvest. So I could have 3 different types of apples, one that blooms and produces in early summer, one in midsummer, and one in late summer. And you can do the same thing for blueberries, just really spreading your cultivars out and your timing out. We get natural mulch from the leaf drop or the chop and drop, and natural compost and fertilizer just from all the diversity that is in the system, and the natural ground cover. We have natural pest control, because if we have such an outrageous diversity of plants, say we have a peach tree, and under the peach tree we have comfrey and echinacea and yarrow and witch hazel, and you know there's a dogwood next door to it, and you're getting all these caterpillars and all these predatory insects and all these birds. You know, you have so much diversity that one pest can't take over, compared to a monoculture apple orchard. You know, 500 apples and there's grass underneath, and you're spraying to kill all the insects. That if one insect gets a hold of it, there's nothing to slow it down or stop to eat the rest of the apple. So you have to continuously put in inputs, because you have this naked and vulnerable system that's just a monoculture. It's just one plant standing in a sterile landscape without any diversity. So that brings us to the next point: resilience through outrageous diversity. It's based on natural systems, and we build healthy soil. So if we look beyond the modern culture to focusing on how nature does it, we get abundant plant growing systems. It's evident that working with nature is most likely the wisest and most productive path to sustainable food systems. With COVID, I think we have a lot of people looking at our food systems now and becoming aware of how fragile it is. And there's a lot of talks on civilizations, and most civilizations, if not all civilizations, that relied only on annual agriculture, they have collapsed. So building resilience through perennial agriculture, through food forests, and through outrageous diversity of those systems is something I think we all should be looking at. All right, we're going to jump into the layers of a food forest. So hopefully everyone's following me here. This is from Temperate Climate Permaculture. Some different practitioners have different layers. I like this one the most, the 9 layers. The traditional is 7 layers minus the aquatic and fungal layer. But we have 9 layers of this edible forest garden. We have our tallest, the canopy, that's number 1 here. let me see if I can, I guess you can see my cursor. Number one here is the canopy. It's the tallest, it's the foundation of the whole layering system. And then we'll have a sub-canopy tree, you know, a smaller tree underneath. Then our shrub layer, our herbaceous ground layers, our ground covers. 6 is our underground layer. What are our roots doing? Are we getting a crop there? Say, and our vertical climbing layer is number 7. And then number 8 is our mycelium network. Our number 8 is our aquatic layer, our wetland layer. And number 9 is our mycelial fungal layer. So we'll dive into these a little deeper. The canopy layer, the tallest, the biggest, the biggest structure on the site. For our area, that's going to be our oaks, that's our pecans, our walnuts. It could be a chestnut, a standard apple. You know, standard apple is a 50-foot tree. So the canopy layer is really typically over 30 foot. This layer is for larger forest gardens. Not every forest garden will have this layer, but if you have the room, you're going to get the most diversity. I think most of our oaks in this area host, you know, 200 plus caterpillars, which feed a lot of birds and feed a lot of diversity and get a lot of moving parts into your system. But, you know, for some small yards, maybe your canopy would be the shrub, or it could be the sub canopy, or you could design a prairie with the same thing, that your canopy is a big blue stem, a 6-foot grass. So just thinking in these systems helps you get the architecture right of your food forest. So the apples, American persimmons are 30-foot plus. Some peaches get that tall. Asian pears, mulberries, hickories. There could be a lot more. We have black cherries in our yard. It may not be a great food producing tree, but I mean, it may affect your yard, or you could have a sycamore or a silver maple or whatever the case may be. The canopy really sets the tone for the entire site. You have to work with the big trees, or you can plant the big trees and kind of really get that foresty feel. Moving on to the next layer, the sub-canopy layer. These are usually 10 to 30 foot high in most forest gardens, at least those with limited space. These plants often make up the acting canopy layer. The majority of fruit trees fall into this category. So for our area, we have the Asian persimmons, a few cultivars here. Feel free to just snap a picture of these. And if you have any questions on any specific cultivars, there's tons more. There's a lot of complexity in some of this, and I can't go through everything, even though I wish I could. But some of the persimmons, Nikita's Gift, Sayo, Rosanyanka, very small, 10 to 15 foot trees, and Nikita's Gifts are, and the Rosanyanka can be 20 or 30 foot. But they're a hybrid persimmon, a cross between American and the Japanese cultivars. And you can see in this image here that there's not many seeds, if any, and they're non-astringent for the most part. So if you've ever bitten into a wild persimmon at the wrong time, it will ruin your week. So these are a little more sweeter and a little more forgiving, and there's a reason they're called, the Latin means food of the gods, because they are absolutely delicious. Semi-dwarf apples, the rootstock's really important on this one, so you want a smaller or less vigorous rootstock, or if you're looking for a more canopy semi-dwarf, the MM 111 rootstock is a good choice. We're able to grow jujubes here, which is this image here. Lang Lee, Tiger, and So Contorted are cultivars that I've had success with, and a lot of other practitioners in the state are utilizing as well. Service berries up here are a great sub-canopy tree. There's a few cultivars, there's lots of natives, and they're just like a blueberry, and they're amazing. They no pests, no nothing, no nonsense. You just got to beat the birds to the berries. The pawpaws as well. It's the banana of the woods. It's the only tropical fruit that grows in North America, and it's native to here. And there's many, many cultivars through Neil Peterson and the University of Kentucky. We've got over 10 cultivars in our yard here of different varieties of pawpaws, and the zebra swallowtail butterfly lays its larva on the pawpaw and also eats the leaves. So you get it's the only plant that butterfly will grow on. So there's just awesome opportunities with all these. Plums, two that I've had success with here are Santa Rosa and Damson. And then we have peaches, almonds, Montmorency cherries. Those are all great subcanopy layers as well. So the shrub layers, the most diverse. I tried to include as many as I could here, but you know, hazelnuts, raspberries, blueberries, blackberries, gooseberries, currants, aronia, nine bark, Nanking cherry, New Jersey tea, spice bush, witch hazel, yastaberry. It's a cross between gooseberries and currants, goomies, elderberry, figs, bush cherries, bush mulberries, sea buckthorn, and false indigo. So these guys with the asterisk, they fix nitrogen in the soil, but you can see here, this is a goomy. It's a sweet scarlet. This is a red lake cherry in our yard. This is a native hazelnut in our yard. Chicago hardy fig, Pixwell gooseberry. And this is a Nanking cherry. It's an Asian cherry. It's not native here, but it produces these big sweet cherries and doesn't give you any pests or problems. That's a hard part of all this, is really identifying what will grow here without inputs. And there are a lot, but it takes a lot of research and understanding from the plant level and what the plant needs. We'll jump into our herbaceous layer. So we're going for our canopy down our shrubs, and we're now evolving out of our woody species and getting into our herbaceous plant species here. There's lots of perennials, but this is, I mean, I could go forever on this layer too, but sea kale, daylily, hostas, there should be a T there, garlic chives, fern, sorrel, arugula, dandelion. Dandelion is an awesome plant, and I would advocate that you don't kill it. It's got so many benefits, as you can eat the root, you can eat the leaves, you can eat the flower. It's medicine. It's fixing nutrients in the soil. It's there for a reason. Eventually it will die out as your soil improves, but it's there healing. We got ramps or wild leeks, ginger, Solomon seal, any natives. That can be echinacea, it could be coneflowers, it could be bee balm, milkweeds, kind of whatever you're into on the native spectrum. We interplant all of our trees with natives just to get those predatory insects and get the pollinators and have a complete ecosystem. We like to design in holes. And then the mints. So the mints are aggressive and they spread like crazy, but my perspective is I'd rather be weed eating and scything mint than I would crabgrass or Johnson grass. So, and it smells really good when you knock it down. And then the medicinal herbs, there's a ton of them, but licorice and horseradish, the comfrey, there's a lot to name. But just to give you the point, as we're moving down from that tall canopy layer, the herbaceous layer plants die back to the ground every winter. They do not produce woody stems, and many culinary and medicinal herbs are in this layer. A large variety of other beneficial plants fall into this layer as well. So we'll jump into the ground cover creeper layer: clovers, violets, creeping raspberry. That's this guy over here. Strawberry, creeping thyme, Bermuda grass is unfortunately ground cover here, and it's something I've battled with in my yard, and philosophically I've given up on it, and I'm letting it happen. But mint and the Roman chamomile as well. There's some overlap with the herbaceous layer and the ground cover layer. However, plants in this layer are often shade tolerant, and they grow much closer to the ground, and they grow densely to fill bare patches of soil and can tolerate some foot traffic as well. I'm really excited about this creeping raspberry plant. It's an Asian raspberry, but you can see it only grows 2 to 3 inches off the ground, and it creeps, and you get these delicious little orange raspberries. So I have that in a few of our persimmon and pawpaw areas, and look to propagate that a little more. So the vines layer, in the Ozarks, we can definitely grow grapes. We focus more on the southern grapes, and the Munson varieties, and some of the other no spray varieties. So everything I'm offering in this is a no spray. They have to hold their own in the system. But if you design the system with diversity, you still will have pests and things like that. But this is giving us the best shot in cultivars to move forward with a holistic and organic approach, and no chemicals, no sprays, and less maintenance as well. So champerelle, elvenclad, edelweiss, these are kind of plant and let nature take over. We can grow kiwis here. If you didn't know that, they're Arctic kiwis. They're over here. There's lots of cultivars. I haven't done too much exploration with this because they can be quite aggressive. You need to grow with the grapes as well. Like they need a pergola or a pretty hefty structure to climb. Cliff Davis in Tennessee, he used to run Spiral Ridge Permaculture. He runs a farm pig and leaf. He's got these growing all over his barns, and they will take over if you don't provide a structure for them. But they produce kiwis, and they are delicious. There's passion flower. There's Sasandra berry, which is a Chinese berry that is vining. There's groundnut, jasmine, and coral honeysuckle. So just some examples, some vine layers. And then we get into our underground root layer. It's more medicinal. These are root crops. There's an amazing variety of edible roots that most people have never heard of. Many of these plants can be utilized in the herbaceous layer as well, and the vining and climbing layer, and the ground cover creeper layer. So some of these layers are intermixed, but the echinacea, you get a pollinator, you get native species, you get a beautiful cut flower, and you also get a medicinal root. Same thing with the dandelion, the Solomon seal, Jerusalem artichoke, daylilies, groundnut, licorice, chicory, and wild ginger. So on the top, it could be part of that herbaceous layer, but then we look at the root level and what's going on there. And I mean, you could also add potatoes and carrots and things to this layer as well, even though they're annuals, but we do intermix annuals with our perennials, of course. So this is a layer that is semi-controversial. We're getting to those out of the original 7 in the food layer world. Some will say a forest doesn't grow in water. I would argue, you can see my yard here, it definitely floods. We're at the bottom of a valley. So I have planted this as a wetland layer because that's what it wants to be. I have some peaches in here and other things as well, but which are alive, surprisingly, but they're probably in the wrong spot. But when we get 3 to 4 inches of rain, there's a river. A river used to be here. If we look at our aerial photography from the 30s, there was a stream here. And in 2020, that stream's still here. The water wants to follow that same path. So we've planted a lot of swamp white oaks, a lot of native wetland plants. There's pawpaws in here. There's cattails. There's 9-barks. There's spice bush. There's elderberries. There's things that can handle basically a swamp and wetland, because that's what this wants to be. So there's a whole host of plants that thrive in wetlands or at the water's edge, and many of them are edible. There are many plants that grow only in water. To ignore this list of plants is to leave out many useful species that provide food, fiber, medicine, animal feed, wildlife food and habitat, biomass, and most important, water filtration through bioremediation or phytoremediation. So essentially, I'm catching all this water now with this basin we planted here. And if this neighbor's spraying glyphosate or this one's got, leaking motor oil, I'm catching all of this through this watershed, and all these plants are filtering it out. So very purifying, these plants, to be able to transform those pollutants and have almost a prairie wetland buffer. The wetlands are the sponges to absorb all those toxins and remediate them. So we are intentionally designing forest gardens which incorporate water features, and it is time we add this water layer to it. Moving on to the next controversial layer, the fungal layer. Fungal networks live in healthy soils. They live within the roots of the forest garden. This underground fungal network transports nutrients and moisture from one area of the forest to another, depending on the needs of the plant. We have something called ectomycorrhizae fungi. This is a whole wormhole here, but you can see this tree and this tree have the roots, and the ectomycorrhizae fungi is connecting their roots together, and they're talking, they're communicating, they're sharing nutrients. Maybe this one's sharing zinc or calcium or phosphorus, or this one's emitting these sugars, and the fungus is eating the sugars and sharing it with this tree. And the underground network of soil organisms is fascinating, complex, and mind-blowing. We're just beginning to understand all this, but as more and more research is being conducted on how mycelium help and build and maintain forests, it's shocking that this layer hasn't been added to this list. So we're proactive in cultivating this layer intentionally. We inoculate all of our roots with different types of mycorrhizae fungi. We inoculate our mulch with wine cap stropharia mushrooms that are edible and you can eat. We inoculate our old logs and cuttings with shiitake mushrooms. You can see this fungal hyphae under our microscope here. So we're really trying to build that fungal network. And since we're not tilling and we're not constantly pulling out plants and messing with the soil, we're getting a diversity of fungi and soil organisms that we aren't killing. Because when you till or you chop up, you'll kill all these organisms. Permaculture is about design. These 7 layers of the forest garden are designed by us. Nature takes what we have designed and runs with it. We just get the benefit from nature's work. We can also design this fungus layer, and we can choose to inoculate with whatever fungus we choose. You have to inoculate or nature will, and it may give you a fungus or a weed or a grass that you may not like. So you have to fill every space that you can and go from there. But I think a big key point of this is that we design this, but nature takes over, and there's always a feedback and always a relationship that you have to pay attention to. And nature's going to do something that you didn't expect, and you're going to have to react to it and adapt and constantly be changing and evolving with your site as you grow and as the food forest grows. So does anybody have any questions on the layers of the food forest before we move on to the design framework?
There are no questions currently in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to mention one thing. Oh, there's one question, but one more thing. You know the wild persimmons that live in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard this theory? Because I did this when I was a little kid. Have you heard this theory of taking the seed of a persimmon, cutting it in half, and looking at the root structure of the cotyledon structure of the seed to see what type of winter we'll have? Yeah,
the knife, spoon, and fork debate.
Yeah, I grew up with that. I wonder if other people do that. If you do that, mention it in the chat to see if
that's definitely an Ozarkian and Appalachian kind of a root. I've definitely found some spoons or I found some knives in it, and it wasn't accurate.
Oh, wasn't accurate?
Yeah,
really?
Well, maybe it used to be, but we've made a lot of changes to the atmosphere, and we've got some pretty wacky weather patterns coming on. So
every time it was inaccurate, I always wondered if I cut it wrong or something like that. So we have a question from Tina Ordway. We have 2 questions. One from Madison. Can you list some plants for wetland layers?
For the wetland?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So here, everyone can see this slide. If we're talking about flowers, I mean, there's cardinal flowers, there's common milkweed, there's prairie blazing star, there's copper iris, there's southern blue flag. But what we have planted ours, we have bald cypress, we have many cultivars of pawpaw, acema, and then we also have a swamp white oak. But then we have elderberries. I mean, growing, and it's good to go by a stream and see what's growing, but elderberries, witch hazels, native sedges, river oats, soft rush. We grow false indigo, aronia, button bushes. I'm just shooting from the hip here. Deciduous hollies, river birches, and you can see this sycamore here. It was struck by lightning, so I never thought I'd have full sun in this area in my lifetime. But we cut it, we put a bat box up. We're going to put an owl box up, but it's kind of a monolithic statue for us now, and we have full sun. So this sycamore has sprouted back to life here. And there's river birches in here, and again, the swamp white oaks. We have hazelnuts. This whole area, these are all elderberries, and you can see they're completely submerged in water, but this will drain. But all these plants can tolerate that wet ecosystem.
Awesome. We have a question from Tina. Is there a recommended minimum size for a good, strong food forest here in the Springfield area? Minimum size for a food forest.
I don't know if there is a minimum size. I mean, you can, my friend Matt Lebon of Custom Foodscaping in St. Louis is on a tiny urban St. Louis lot outside of Tower Grove. And he's got, I have some pictures of that. He's got some mega diversity. You could have a container food forest. I mean, it just depends on the structure of the plant you choose. For the Springfield area, if you wanted to, I think a half acre or an acre is a good chunk. Our property here on the west side of Springfield is a half acre, and you can see we have black walnuts. I have cypresses and oaks and pawpaws and persimmons and big structural canopy trees. So it kind of depends on your goals, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But a strong food forest design, the more diversity you can fit, and you can fit a lot of diversity just with these smaller, native structural plants in the shrub layer. There is so much diversity. So it's more on the creativity of the designer and the palate and food preferences of the person in relationship with that ecosystem.
Awesome. Janice asked, how is climate change impacting permaculture design?
I think permaculture design has always been aware of climatic changes and alternating weather systems, and I think it's more about getting to the root of the cause, and that would be our industrial extractive civilization. So permaculture is all about weaving that web back together and practicing three ethics of earth care, people care, and sharing the surplus. Those are the three ethics. So I'm not sure climate change is impacting permaculture design. I think permaculture design is impacting the root of the problem of our severance from nature and our extractive ideologies and extractive consumerism, where we take and we take and we take and we take, and there's no relationship with the planet or where our food came from or where our minerals and metals and cars, and we're just kind of consuming at end, and you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, right? So the way we intentionally design our ecosystems in our homes, we got a big mountain to climb, but design is a huge part of that, and having that reverence and relationship with the land as well.
Awesome. Madison said, Park Rose Permaculture has a 1/4 acre in Portland. Look her up. She does great videos. Other than that, we don't have anything else in the chat.
Okay. Yeah. And the Rogers lot is a community forest garden on the north side of Springfield. It's 0.22 acres. Eric Tonesmeyer's permaculture food forest in Massachusetts, I think, is 1/10 of an acre. So, I mean, it all depends on your scale and what you got, and you got to make it work and be creative. So
we do have one more question. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
How did Ben choose his land, and what was he looking for in order to maximize his permaculture installation?
I don't see that question.
It's in the Q&A.
Huh. So I chose this property because it was cheap. We paid $15,000 for it, and we paid it off.
For the land?
It has these magnificent walnut trees, and I don't know if I have any pictures, but they are 80 years old. 3 people couldn't fit their arms around it. So very majestic trees. And that sycamore here in this picture, we have these canopy, this is a black walnut, this is a black cherry. This was a 100-foot sycamore tree. It was the biggest tree in the whole neighborhood. So we bought it for the massive trees and the huge urban lot. A half acre in town is pretty significant size. So it was just kind of where we were at. We were traveling, visiting farms, visiting ecological communities, and we came back to Springfield and kind of just bought this. It wasn't a plan. It was an impulse buy. And it's worked out. We're going to perfect this system. And when I say perfect, there's quotations because nothing's perfect. But but do the best that we can to get this system in check before we go on to bigger scale. I mean, I would like a farm scale system, but we've been blessed to have this, and it's paid for, and we're free of the debt, and that gives you the ability to focus on more of those regenerative practices if you're not having to work to pay a mortgage and things of that nature. So it's not just about the food. We are going to move to design framework. Just a warning, I'm going to blaze through this a little fast. So please, if you have questions, let me know. So when we start with design, we start with patterns. You know, what is happening that doesn't change? You know, there's this honeycomb structure of this yellow jacket and the sun. The sun's patterns don't change. The solstices and the equinox and everything, there's not much in life that doesn't change. Life is always in flux, but gravity and some of these eternal patterns of spirals and spirals of the planets, and the dendritic patterns of a riverbed, and the dendritic patterns of your veins flowing through your body, and the dendritic patterns of a tree branch. Really focusing on the patterns and really tuning in to how nature does things can make you a great designer just by being a participant. There's not much that we have to do. We just really plug in. So become aware of those patterns, how the sun moves through your site, how the wind moves through your site, things of that nature. So here's our permaculture design process. We start with the base map. We're going to do a site analysis, observation, site immersion, do some layout, some sketching, do a zone and sector analysis. We'll talk about scale permeance. We want a vision. We want a dream. We want to identify who we are, what we want out of it, our holistic context. Then we'll get into our planning, a conceptual design. It's our big picture bubble sketches, a schematic design. We start getting more elements into it, and then our master design, which I have this in quotations because there's no such thing as a final design. You're always evolving and always changing. And me as a designer who sells designs, I've moved out of this master design because I'm not there forever. And it's a mutual relationship between you and your site. So your design's always going to be evolving. It's a living design. I should change that to living design. Then our development, you know, who are we? Personal, environmental, technical, seasonal, financial. What are our abilities to maintain this site? What's our budget? Those seasonal rhythms, things of that nature. And we'll talk about implementation, and installation and maintenance. So we have the site, we have you, the client, or the food forest grower, and this is our planning process. So this gives us a structure to not miss any beats and to make sure we do a thorough analysis before we ever put a shovel in the ground. We'll talk about the scale of permeance very briefly. This is from the Agrarians platform from Darren Doherty. He's in Australia. But we start with the things that are most permanent and hardest to change. So climate, what's your latitude? You know, we're 37 degrees latitude. You're not changing that. You're not changing how the sun hits that latitude. You're not changing that you're in North America. You know, these climatic big picture things that you can't change. We start with that. How much rainfall do you get? How much acid rain do you get? What's the wind like coming through the site? You know, do you have mountains? Do you have rivers? You know, you can't really change those things. I guess that's debatable now, but climate wise, usually we can't change those big overall patterns. And then we move to our next hardest thing to change is our geography. That's going to be your geology, your bedrock, the shape of your hills, the cultural geography, everything. You know, for us, it's the Ozarks. There's a big culture here, and that can be a big weight to overcome. But the geography in our next layer is water. You know, how all living things need water. Water is life. So that would be our next step that we have to design with first. So these two you can't really change, but we can start developing passive water systems and things like that. And then access, you know, your paths, your roads. How are you going to access a site? How are you going to move nutrients and moving materials to the site and harvest and those sort of things. So these 4 are before we ever get to this forestry stage of plants and shrubs and trees and everything we're talking about today. So these 4 in the design process come before we ever put a plant in the ground. And then we go past forest and we get into buildings and fences and soil and economy and energy. And right now, a good example of our economy, it changed fast and it kind of drops fast, but it kind of is fluid and comes back and goes up and down, up and down. And the same thing with soil. We can destroy soil very fast, but we can also create soil very fast. So I won't go into too depth of these ones down here, but we're going to be focusing on forestry here. But you have to get these other 4 in line before you ever talk about forestry. And this helps us systematically go through, okay, this is my climate, this is my geography, this is my water layer, this is how I access the site. So you plant the rain, you plant your paths, and then you plant the trees. Yeah, and we'll talk about holistic context. So permaculture, if there's anything weak in permaculture, and there's a lot, it's a human system. It's a holistic context. It's decision making. Permaculture is weak on how do we make decisions. So ask yourself, who are you? What do you love? What gets you up in the morning? What are you trying to accomplish? And what do you want to eat? If you shouldn't be growing persimmons if you don't like persimmons, or you shouldn't be growing apples or jujubes or tomatoes. If you don't like those fruits, you shouldn't plant them, even if they grow well here. Plant what you want, and that will meet the needs of the site. Your decision makers or your team or your spouse or your partner or whoever that might be, or family members, and your resource base, that's under your management, but your stated purpose of why. The holistic decision making is like a plugin that fills this gap. I have toddlers, so I apologize. It's like a plugin that fills a gap and makes permaculture projects more likely to succeed. Adding a dash of holistic management doubles or triples the power of permaculture to affect lasting change in the world. We're at the point where I can't imagine not using this decision processing and as a consultant. But permaculture is still awesome, but we do need to be able to make better decisions. So we make this context, we write it all out, we sit down and we dive deep into ourselves, which is the hardest part of any of this, and we make decisions weighing that context. So you're essentially designing your food forest or your life to be more in tune with really where you want to be, but having a methodology and a system to weight that and make sure you're on the right path. So talking about site assessment, the base map, what's your soil like? Clay, sandy, well-drained, gravelly, where, why, natural drainage, where does the water want to go? Where are the sources and flows on the site? Your gutters, your streets, your paths, your roofs, your driveways, your compacted soils. Maybe a neighbor that sprays glyphosate and it drifts through the wind. Where are these sources and flows coming, and how do you utilize them or divert them? Measurements and surveying of your site, zones, sectors, microclimates. What was the land use? Do you have any historic aerials? Was there no gas station on your site? Was it an old dairy farm? Could there be possible contaminants in the soil? Look at the historic land use. Talk to the neighbors. This is extremely valuable, especially if there's some older generations that they know more than anyone and can tell you all sorts of stories about the property and the people that live there and what they did. And I'll put the pieces of the puzzle together. Do you have codes and permits that you need? Some municipalities require permits to plant a tree. Plant anyway. Where are your utilities? Contact DigRight, get all your utilities mapped out, and map that all out on your site, and kind of indicator plants, what's growing. Do you have Bermuda grass? Do you have euonymus? Do you have invasives you need to take care of before you ever put anything else in the ground? Elderberry, sycamore, is it wet? Is it dry? Currently what's growing. This is a danger zone. I know a lot of people that skip all this assessment and just go out there and plant. You got to take the time to assess and really understand your site so you're implementing the correct and relevant system for what the site can handle. So we start here with the base map. This is a simple GIS map. Most municipalities, the city of Springfield, Christian County, Webster County, wherever you're at, if you have a specific question, shoot in the chat about where you can get some of this data. We do create base maps and things of that nature, but this is just the yellow is the property line. These are contour lines that show the topography and slope. You can kind of see the trees on the site, but just an overall face it north, and you can start adding layers on it from there. So our design process really starts with observing and interacting with the site and analyzing. So we want to read the landscape. We need to become landscape detectives. So we flag out any existing trees. There's a bird nest here. We have an old fruit tree, brush tunnel, stumps, rills, sedimentation. There could be oil slicks. In our property, we had a chemical shed that we took out. I'm never going to plant there because I know that it was it's contaminated. I don't have to do any tests. I saw the turpentine and the diesel fuel and all the things that were spilled everywhere, and it's just, I made a decision to make that more of a patio than ever plant in it. So, you know, what's going through your site? For us, we have a lot of urban cats coming through our yard, and you know, maybe you got you really just want to sit and interact with the site. The observation and reflection are the greatest tools we have as humans, I would say, and we can learn, adapt, and progress in our understanding limitlessly, but it only can be achieved through listening, observing, and pondering our relationship to the land. We always run the risk of imposing solutions before we observe what the situation might actually be calling for. A lengthy observation is always better than hasty action, especially when we are moving soil or building a home or constructing a food forest. And a good thing to do is explore your local forest so you have an idea what grows best in your area, and just take casual walks and identify the perennial plants, observe how they grow in relation to one another, observe the plant communities, what's growing by what, and how. Later, you can use that list to find the more commercial variants of the wild plants that you can grow in your food forest. I would say this step is the most crucial, because if we want to create an edible landscape that requires less work and maintenance, you need to grow the species that are well adapted to our area, species that are volunteering to grow on your site. If you have nature as your ally, when you use those natural tendencies of native vegetation, we'll be doing considerably less work. It's that permaculture principle of working with nature rather than against it.
Hey, Ben.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Hannah Major asks, are you aware of any permits required to plant trees in Springfield? Loved the plant anyway, but.
I'm sure somewhere in there you're required to get a tree permit. I mean, I can't say that I pulled a permit to plant any of our thousands of trees we've ever planted in the Springfield area. I'm not entirely sure. I know on commercial properties, I think it may be a code, but I don't think it is enforced, if that answers your question.
And then we have another question in the Q&A from Heather Breeding. What is the best way to initially control invasives?
We'll get that to that later, and it kind of depends on your budget and time and things of that later, but that'll be on the maintenance, or it'll be on the implementation portion of this presentation. But a quick thing could be, depending on the invasive, I mean, there's definitely the chemical route, which we don't use, but I would say it is a tool, and I've evolved a lot that say it could be a valuable tool, depending on the aggressiveness and of the infestation of the plants. So we have Japanese honeysuckle here. We've manually pulled it all. We have Bermuda grass, which I have accepted as life. And we have Euonymus forte, also known as winter creeper, that I've done a few different things. I cut the vine, we solarize it, or we choke it out with a silage tarp. We weed eat it. You can spray 30% vinegar. There's tons of things. And there's tons of literature on remediating invasives from your landscape. But we'll get into that in a little bit if you can hang with me. Is there anything else?
No, that's all.
Okay. So yeah, sit quietly and just turn off your mind and observe and observe your site, immerse yourself, sit there for 5 minutes or 50 minutes, just sit there and feel the breeze, listen to the birds, what's going on around you. Maybe you hear a bus, or for us, I hear domestic disputes down the street, or people yelling or screaming, or cats running through my yard. You know, urban things that we have in our context in West Springfield, or a guy driving 40 miles an hour down the street. But then I also hear the robins and the fledglings learning to fly, and I hear the crickets, and the catbirds and the cardinals, and the wind chimes, and my walnuts dancing in the wind. You know, really sit there and ground yourself. These moments of mindfulness really help put things in perspective, and they reveal a wealth of information about the site of itself if you just go in with no preconceived notions and let the site tell you its story. Some other tools we use are zones, sectors, and microclimates. So if you've ever heard of zones, permaculture zones are a key design tool we use. They're part of a decision-making matrix. Zones are concerned with the level of human activity, efficiency of movement, and human effort. So really it's proximity. So our house would be zone 0, and it would be yourself as well. And then we have zone 1. These are the places you go every day. There's a saying that you can harvest your salad in your slippers. So these are places you can go and not get wet, not get dirty, right outside your front door, right outside your back door, maybe your kitchen, outside your kitchen window. You know, these are your most intensive zones. The zone system is based on frequency and density of activity and the use of specific locations on that environment. It gives us the opportunity to move people and materials to a site in the most benign and healthy ways, based on need, location. So your zone 1 is where you're at every day. Where do you spend your time? And this is also internal for humans. You know, it really shows your own patterns of, you walk to the mailbox every single day. Maybe you should plant along that walking corridor because you're going to be more in tune with it. You're going to see it, you know, out of sight, out of mind. That zone 1 is the heart of your system, and plant the most intensive things. Your zone 2 is going to be, you know, your more animal systems. It's going to be farther away from your house. It could be your chickens and maybe maybe a vegetable garden, things like that. And the farther you go is the less frequency you visit. So then zone 3s are usually good for your orchard. We have a zone 1 food forest. It doesn't mean you can't intermix these things, but just based on scale and sunlight and things, your more intense zones are around your house, and places that are farther away, based on frequency, your zones go out. So zone 3 is pretty good for the food forest. Then we get into zone 4, where you maybe go to once a month, and then your zone 5 is kind of your wild areas. I'm just going to skim that. We'll talk about the sectors here, and sectors basically a process of mapping the movement of natural forces going to the property. That's your wind, your water, sunshine, how much sun you're getting. By taking an inventory of these forces and assessing their strengths and direction of movement, we're able to put them to work for us. This eliminates the need for overdependence on technological means for heating, cooling, and energy, and helps proper placement of vegetation and other things in the landscape. So you wouldn't want to plant your baby apple tree in a wind corridor that gets the southwest prevailing winds, and, you know, puts stress on your tree. You'd want to identify that before you ever planted. What is coming through the site? That could be sounds. That could be where does the sun rise and fall? Where does the storms come in? Where's the winter winds? Where's the summer winds? How does water flow through your site? So things of that nature. And then microclimates, you know, everything has a little microclimate. Your southern slopes are going to be hotter and drier and more full sun. And your western slopes are going to be a lot hotter and drier. You know, you have that afternoon sun if you don't have any shade. Your northern slopes are cooler and shadier, and your eastern slopes are kind of that special spot where you get 6 hours of sunlight a day, but you don't get that harsh afternoon shade. You get the gentle sunshine throughout the morning and mid-afternoon, and then it crosses the horizon and goes to the west. So the eastern portion of your yard is a great place for food forests if it's appropriate, or for these tree systems, or for any plantings of that matter, depending on your contacts. Same thing with the solar orientation. South face is hotter, warmer, north faces are cooler, east faces are cooler as well. And kind of how air drains and water drains on your property, cool breezes and updrafts and drainages. And then if you have shelter belts, you know, designing and using trees to mitigate wind. So if you plant an evergreen buffer around the north to kind of mitigate those northern winds. These are just examples. And again, I won't design as a whole other presentation, and many of these other slides could be whole other presentations in themselves as well. So, so we'll start talking about the structure and architecture of our food forest. So in our climates, in our hemisphere, northern hemisphere, the sun is always in the south. So we want to design our system that are smaller herbaceous layers that need full sun stair step to our taller canopy trees. So our canopy are the largest things we plant in the north. And that's so they don't shade out all of our other entities. So our big apple trees here, and then maybe we have a smaller plum or peach and some raspberries and blackberries and gooseberries and gummies and whatever you want. And we get to our herbs. And some of these other plants could be on the north end. They're cooler or shadier. That's their microclimate they like. So you plant them on the north end. So really building relationships with these plants and understanding what they like and where they grow in the wild, and then putting that in action. But this pattern right here of just putting your tall stuff to the north, I've seen some people, they plant all these fruit trees on their south side of their house and on the south side of their property, and they shade out everything else. So that's a type 1 error. So always put your tall stuff to the north, even if it's, you can imagine this is a tomato and you got some peppers, and then you have some peas and some spinach and things like that. Even in an annual system, this works well. And the architecture of our roots as well. So look at the feeder roots, and you have deep prairie plants going 8 foot down, or you have a tap root, or you have what kind of root systems are you working with? And this is getting into a little more depth and complexity, but I wanted to mention as well that how do the roots interact with the other roots? What is the architecture of the root zone? And David Jackie's Edible Forest Gardens is a wealth of information. That's where this image is coming from. Again, with the north orientation, you can see here, this is north, the tall species are here, and this is called the sun trap. So you're essentially designing a big U. These taller species are on the edge, and when the sun hits in there, it creates a big warm nest, a microclimate, and you can see these keyhole paths that maximize your planting space and minimize your planting paths. So the sun trap is a warm and protected environment. You kind of create a little island. And I would say that the food forest design, especially on our property here, is that we're creating little arcs, little islands of diversity and for long-term plant growth. And we're creating that arc and plant reservoir of, you know, what future generations hopefully can use and come and take cuttings, and long after we're dead and gone, this place will still be producing fruit without us here. We really want to make sure we have enough sun. So here we are at 37 degrees latitude. You know, where does the sun rise? Where does it set across your horizon? These patterns don't change. So find your latitude and path out your sun. We want at least 6 hours of the sunlight, and if preferably we want that gentle eastern sunlight. This is just an example of a base map. This is a Victory Mission in northwest Springfield off of Commercial, but you can see our base map, the buildings. You know, we have pollutants, street lights, leaky cars. We have cigarette butts. We have trash. We have a Bradford pear, we have an elm. This is where the kitchen is. This is a prayer garden. This is the hangout and cafeteria, gravel abandoned lot. You know, this is how the water's flowing through the site. This is where the sun is. This is how the wind's coming. This is where the sun is on the winter solstice. This is where it is on the equinoxes and the summer solstices. And these are pretty crude. This is just, just sketching. And we go from these patterns to details. We start weaving all these other layers together, all this design process, and we start mapping it. And you can do this on a computer. You can do this on paper with tracing paper, and you can just, you can all sorts of ways. But we're really starting to weave this process together and give us a systematic steps. One time a friend said, I was like Bob Ross, because the painting just paints itself. But when you really map all these things out and you really take the time to assess, the design makes itself, because you map everything out and it makes sense. As a designer and as a holistic thinker, going through these processes really help you. So then we'll do the zonal analysis of, this is where everyone spends their most time. This is the front door. This is the back door. Here's the zone 1 path where the paths are beaten in. There's no sidewalks, but the homeless individuals that utilize this service, they've made their own way, and that's the way they use. So that's a zone 1, and they also have an area here, but nobody goes down here to the zone 4. It's kind of a no man's land. So where would you plant a food forest in here? It's going to have to be in your zone 2. And then you kind of do your conceptual design, just draw it out, make shapes. And this is an apple, or these aren't any special trees. It's just the shapes and the overall patterns of what those could be. And then you can kind of get into the more detailed designs and schematics. You really start laying it out. You start labeling it, and it kind of all comes to form. This is more of a paper rendering. How the water, how the sun moves through the site, your zones, the existing site conditions, and then kind of a conceptual design. This is from David Jackie of Edible Forest Gardens. We start with that habit bubble diagram. So there's a woodland edge here, there's an old field mosaic, access zone, and kind of just going through and writing down everything you see on the site, what's there. There's perennials all over. There's vines on the fence. There's existing tall trees. What are the trees? There's an aquatic garden. There's trellis climbers over a social space. What's going on the site? I'm not, the form will grow gradually as we go through the sequence, beginning as something loose like this and amorphous, and gradually it becomes more and more complicated and refined and more differentiated. As we build each pattern to design, we experience a single gestalt that it gradually is becoming more and more coherent. That's the Bob Rossness of it. This is a quote from Christopher Alexander, a book called The Timeless Way of Building from 1979. Every level, certain broad patterns get laid down, and the details are squeezed into position to conform to the structure of these broader patterns. Of course, under these circumstances, the details are always slightly different, since they get distorted as they are squeezed into the larger structure already laid down. In a design of this type, one naturally senses that the global patterns are more important than the details, because they dominate the design. Each pattern is given the importance and control over the whole, which it deserves in the hierarchy of patterns. Essentially what that's saying is that we design from these big bubble patterns to more details. So we start integrating now, get more schematic, add some elements, ponds, annual agriculture, shrubs, pawpaws, persimmons, start mapping up our trees on the north and mapping everything out. And then you can move to a more detailed design plan. Once we have that solid scheme that resolves all the design needs, we work at that more detailed level. The detail is where we take our chosen scheme and make it more exact, given those specific details in harmony with the bigger picture. The plant placement, again, is one of the last kinds of design choices we make, because it's one of the most detailed. We get the big picture right, and then we work on the more detailed issues, and we don't get caught up in the details until we've settled the larger pattern at the larger scale. This is our schematic pattern for our house here that I did in 2015, and this is the only design I have for the house. Everything else has been shooting from the hip and just the relationship with the site and moving forward. So it's a good direction. The design is a living document. It points you in a direction, but that's all it is. You've got to still do the work, and you've got to interact with the plants and make those decisions. How are we on questions or anything, Anna?
We have a question from Tina. She said, how do we get a copy of the slide for presentation?
That's a question for you. I can send you a PDF or however.
Yeah. We will also be uploading this video to Facebook tomorrow, so anyone will be able to view the video on our Facebook, on the Springfield Community Gardens Facebook page.
And I also have a Google Drive document with so much overwhelming information in it that we made a community resources for everyone. If you've taken any of our workshops before, you may have been on that, but hopefully Hannah can send me everyone's email address and I can add you all to that Google Drive and all those shared documents. There's books if you want to learn more about mycorrhizae fungi, or you want to learn more about specific pawpaws or specific cultivars or rootstocks or stormwater management or whatever the case may be. There's a whole diversity of information in that Google Drive. So Hannah and I, we can figure that out at the end. But yeah, I can make a PDF of this presentation and we can send it out.
Awesome. We have another question. Hannah Major asks, how do you handle a site with a lot of existing trees that you want to turn into a food forest?
Yeah, there's a lot of shade tolerant things. So I'm growing a lot of fruit and nut trees and shrubs under some black walnut trees. We'll get to a picture of that in a little bit, but what sort of trees are they, Hannah, if you have time to put that in the chat? But full shade, I mean, the persimmons grow in full shade, pawpaws grow in full shade, the gooseberries and currants and elderberries grow in shade. And they still produce. They're not as productive as they are in the sun, of course, but they are producing. We have gooseberries in full shade, and we got I don't know how, a bushel, or we got a bucket full. The kids ate most of them, but I definitely got some. But I mean, I have red buds growing. I'm looking at a shade garden right now. Elderberries, I have a shagbark hickory. We have mulberries growing in the shade. My elderberries are 14 foot tall, full bloom under a black walnut. Black walnuts emit allelopathic toxin called juglone that basically kills or weakens plants near it. But a lot of these plants evolved with black walnuts, the persimmon, you know, all these things I just named. So they have in their natural ability, they have a tolerance to juglone, so they can tolerate the full shade, they can tolerate the wet boggy soil, and they can tolerate the allelopathic chemicals. So hopefully that answers. I mean, there's a lot of things that can grow in shade, I guess is my answer.
Awesome.
So other design process we should talk about is how are we going to water this system? For me, everything I plant is passive. We have no irrigation on any of these plants. When we plant, we wait for rain. So, okay, it's raining. I need to get out there and plant right now. And we plant with my wife says it's really supposed to rain. I think she's lying. She's been telling me that for 2 weeks. With the passive water, you know, we can design swales or regenerative earthworks or small systems to get that tree established. But we inoculate our roots with a mycorrhizae inoculant. We spray compost tea. We mulch heavily. We plant our cover crops when we make our disturbance, or we plant our insectary plants or our guild plants, and we'll get into the guild in a second here. But how are we going to water these? How are they going to establish? All the plants and big trees and shrubs and big things that we've planted, we don't water. We don't take care of in any way, shape, or form on the water spectrum. We selected the right rootstocks. We gave them a good start with the inoculation of the soil ecosystem, and we built them little earthworks to get established. Some of them have larger earthworks, but I've moved away from those bigger earthwork systems, and they depend on your context and your scale. So essentially what we're trying to do is slow water down, spread it, and sink it in our landscape, and basically build these little microstructures so we catch the water coming down contour. And contour is just a level line on elevation. and the water comes down, we capture it, it absorbs into the soil, and waters our roots. I would not go into your yard and just start digging swales. We have a whole webinar on regenerative earthworks and water harvesting we did about a month ago. That's on the Community Gardens Facebook and probably some other places. But if this whole water thing is a very complex system, so we're not going to get too much into that, but just how you're going to water, because you could go out there and irrigate and do things like that, but we want to design it like a forest. Go back to entering the forest. Who waters the forest? No one. It's the clouds water it, and we need to design our systems to be similar. So as a mentor of mine, Brad Lancaster, says, plant the rain. We plant the rain first, and then the trees come after, and it goes at a scale of permanence. That water is before forest. So figure out how you're going to water. You can see some of these swale systems here. You can see the smaller diversion swale. How can you harvest water off your roof and pipe it to a plant, or pipe it to a basin? Keep it out of the stormwater system. Keep it out of our rivers. How do we take that into our own hands and start filtering and bettering our sites and managing those urban pollutants? So other design processes is access and paths. This has got to be one of my favorite parts, because once you mark out all the paths, the space starts to get some form, and you get these patches, and you get these areas that kind of pop out, and again, it designs itself once you do it. We do most of our paths on contour as much as possible for water harvesting and things of that nature, but our paths, depending on where they are 3 to 4 foot wide. You can mulch, you can I am now just mowing or weed eating my paths, and the rest I leave wild. It depends on your aesthetic, of course, of how you want to do all this. But yeah, these are keyhole beds, so we minimize our paths. This is from Toby Hemingway's book, Gaia's Garden, which is a great thing. We want to apply these patterns in nature to distribute our path and our nutrients. So how does nature distribute flows and access? So we kind of go from a river pattern or your circulatory system, and you just mimicking those sort of things. These keyholes, you can see it, they're maximizing space compared to having this all be road and path, because in a road and path system, half of your growing space is path. So we want to minimize our paths and maximize our productivity in our ecosystem. This is our path system here at our homestead in Springfield. We're working on this rock one right now. So you can see there's some keyhole beds here. They kind of go through. These are swales, small swales, and our path is on the bottom of the swale. So water charges all this, water charges all that. And you can see the Bermuda grasses coming in. Mulching is a lot of work, and I'm moving away from mulch paths just because of mulching a half acre full of paths with the wheelbarrow is tedious and labor intensive. And so really designing your paths for the long term, either inoculating it with red clover or white clover, or a native grass that you would just mow strips, or a heavy ground cover that can take a beating. But mulch is really nice if you have a small yard. If you use gravel or rocks, just think in 5 years, even if you put a landscape fabric and do everything perfectly right, weeds are going to get in. Dust is going to settle, sand is going to settle, and weeds are going to germinate in that rocky substrate. That's a long-term thing. They do look really nice for a few years. You can see our gravel driveway. This is 2 foot of gravel I put on this year, and you can see the plantain and the chicory. They don't care. They're popping through. But you can see that once we build these paths, we got a patch here, and all these patches develop. This is a native patch. This is pawpaw persimmon, Montmorency cherry. There's another pawpaw. There's a jujube, a false indigo, another persimmon, an apple tree here, goji berry, natives. I could go on and on, but you can kind of see how the way we design our path designs our planting beds as well. Please repeat ground cover paths, good for path. Yeah, I think clover. I think I have a a slide about that, about the paths. I'll bring that up in a second. So the foundation of a food forest, or any planting for that matter, is healthy living soil. So we want healthy living soil. This is a soil food web. We also have a presentation on that, and there's a lot of information in the Google Drive on nurturing your soil food web and creating healthy compost and compost teas and things of that nature. But really, our water systems and things like that can all be remediated by just having a healthy soil food web. And of course, we're not tilling. Everything is growing and acting like a forest, which the leaves drop in the winter, and you're getting all this humus and dendritic material that is basically like a layer cake, just over hundreds of years growing bigger and bigger and bigger. So plants release sugars called exudates that they eat. They get their energy from the sun, of course, with photosynthesis, but they pump sugars into the ground. And to do the quick and dirty of this is that those sugars attract fungi and bacteria. And the plant says, hey, I got the sugar, come to the party. And the fungi and bacteria show up, they eat the sugar, and these higher predatory see the fungi and bacteria there, and the plant releases all these nutrients and things in the soil. The fungal bodies and the bacterial bodies will absorb them into their bodies, but they can't make them plant soluble. So when the nematodes and the arthropods and things of that eat the fungi and bacteria and they poop it out, they're pooping out those nutrients that the plants need right at their root zone. So if this plant needs zinc, it says, hey, I'm emitting this sugar. Hey, fungus, go get me some zinc and I'll give you this good sugar stuff. So the fungi gets its gluey web and grabs some zinc and transports it to its body and emits it right at the, well, it gets eaten by a nematode, and then it's distributed right at the plant surface, the root surface. So the complexity of this is fascinating. We're just learning a lot. We have a microscope, so we look at all this all the time, but definitely something to dive into. This is the most important part of your food forest, is nurturing your soil and healthy living soil. Nature doesn't like to be bare, so we always have cover crops or have some sort of fill every space that you can with the plant that you want, because if you don't, nature will. So we want to cover nature as a prude, and we need to keep her covered. So you can see in this saprophytic fungi mulch thing that all these bacteria and fungus, when they're eaten, they release these glues called glomamine, and there's a bunch of others that they emit, but it binds soil particles together and creates structure that allows all these other trophic levels to evolve and gives you lots of nutrients and cover for your roots on your fruit trees. Our healthy soil is one of the great unsung heroes of water management as well. And oftentimes focusing on healthy soil would be the most effective technique to slow spread and sink water. It acts as a giant sponge and holds water across the sky and across surfaces. So we want to get organic matter and soil biology into our systems. We want to add that organic matter through strategic planting, composting, mulching, and et cetera. To speed up production cycles of the biological function in your site, you can use compost teas, fungal inoculants, and other microorganisms, such as effective microorganisms, or you could use biological inoculants like Michael Phillips does in the Holistic Orchard. He sprays clays and neem oil, and I mean, he's got thousands of things that he's using, but lots of biological things you can do just to plant that seed for you. While we're talking about roots, as edible landscapers, we're most concerned with the quality of soil horizon A. That's going to be this first layer. That's where the most biologically active soil is in the first few feet. You can kind of see that microbial biomass decrease. This is from NRCS. But the soil biota populations are in that first 6 to 12 inches of soil. So that's really where we want to focus our energy. That doesn't mean that the roots of the soil food web, I mean, these will go all the way down the bedrock, and some of these bacteria and fungus actually eat bedrock. So they can take limestone and extract calcium out of it into their bodies And then when they get eaten and pooped out, excreted out, all those nutrients and available minerals are to the plant. So nature provides all these in a closed system. We don't need to add any inputs as long as we get this right, healthy soil. We want to talk about soil biological succession. So if we scrape an entire site, it's going to be compacted and dry, and weeds come up, and it's severely bacteria dominated. There's a very few fungi. That's our Bermuda grasses. That's our chickweed. That's our plantains and dandelions. They're the pioneer weeds that pop up, and they're there to armor the soil and to start pumping exudates into the soil and slowly regenerate. And if we let that go for 100 years, it would turn into a forest. If you've ever seen an abandoned pasture or abandoned lot, it grows to weeds, and then goes to more shrubby, wild blackberries and thorns and thickets and thistles, and then it goes to cedar trees or sycamores, and then maybe some hickories start popping up. And then eventually, over 100 years, it would become an oak forest. We can accelerate succession by accelerating the balance of microbial activity in the soil. I might be losing some people here, but very, very important stuff, and I would look into it deeper. We have all these bacteria. Yeah.
We have a question from Nancy. What are the major soil problems in Missouri right now?
It depends where you're at. I mean, if you're in an agricultural field, I would say there's no nutrients from overabuse of lime and herbicides and fungicides. We rely completely on industrial agriculture and chemical means. So we really have to change that system and just abandon it in a way. On urban lots, we have compaction. We have, contaminated soils from past building materials. Could be lead, could be cadmium. You could have asbestos, things like that. And then just poor soil management of, again, compacting, of walking on your garden beds, of not having a healthy fungus, of tilling, of using, every time you till, you kill all those organisms and you reset the succession back to this stage. So we really want to act like a forest and build, but I think the major soil problems we have in Missouri are the major soil problems we have globally, is that we're killing our soil. And soil is the great connector of our lives. And we come from the dirt, right? From the dirt we come, and we shall return. So nurturing our soil food web and nurturing the soil is definitely one of the biggest things you can do to have a healthy tree. One thing that
I noticed in Justin Dreyer says preach. One thing I noticed, I grew up in Dade County, Missouri, and the soil there has so much clay. Mm-hmm. Like when you get it wet, there's just so many hunks of clay. Is there anything to incorporate that, or? Sure.
Yeah. You can use cover crops. Daikon radishes is a great, they're called drillers. You can inoculate with cover crops. You can start building, you can sheet mulch and you can build soil very fast, more than we've been told, especially when you add these organisms, you add organic matter, and you get the right players. You get all the people, you invite all the people to the party. You get the mycorrhizal fungi, you get the saprophytic fungi, you get the bacteria, you get these higher organisms, protozoa, nematodes that are eating the bacteria and the fungus, and they're having a big party all around the plant, and they're getting hot and heavy and reproducing and being reckless. And, there's a big party, and you basically create this big immune system. And then the roots of the plant can dive deeper and start really transitioning in the soils. And if you continue adding organic matter, we'll talk about that here in a second, of chopping and dropping and more the maintenance of this. So, roots in the soil, healthy soil food web, it'll go through anyway. Like I said, some bacteria literally eat rock and make those nutrients and minerals available to plants. So I don't know if you've ever seen a tree growing on a rock here in the Ozark, just like a boulder with the cedar coming out of it. It's like, how the hell is that happening? So nature will, or if, even on an urban through concrete, there's a crack in the concrete and you have a tree growing through it. It's like, okay, well, nature is resilient and nature finds a way. We just have to plug into her system, her operating system, and get on with it. but daikon radishes are really good for clay. And then, you know, animals, and you're adding organic matter and you're transitioning the site, and you can do that as fast as you want or as slow as you want. So you can see here in these buckets, we're inoculating all of our spring plantings with mycorrhizae fungi. We use this mycorrhizal inoculant made by Bigfoot. It's got biochar, kelp, worm castings. We also use our vermicompost from our worms, and we make really good compost through thermophilic composting. Lots of good composting resources out there. Then this is a big compost tea sprayer. You can also just make your tea and add it in a bucket, or use a water pump, or use a concrete sprayer, and aerate and do all these things. So I'm not going to go too much more into that because we're running out of time, but this successional planting, you know, when we plant our food forest, we have, everything's a baby. This is a long-term investment. This is intergenerational, and it takes time. But the benefits and you're creating an ecosystem. So the first few years, you maybe have these small baby trees you put in, and you focus on your vegetables still, and you're transitioning slowly. You have your berries that'll produce in 2 to 3 years, and your vegetables are producing, and your fruit trees grow. And in 5 to 10 years, you know, you're starting to get a little bit of fruit, depending on your rootstock and the cultivars you chose and things of that nature. This is where I am right now. We're on year 4 or 5. I forget, after 3 toddlers or 3 children under 5. I'm surprised my brain still works. But we're about in this stage, and we're starting to get produce. But in 20 years, you know, you have this full functioning ecosystem. So really think in terms of years, and, you know, 1 to 3, 5 to 10, and 20 plus of how is this system going to look and how's it going to grow. And, you know, it's going to benefit much more than you. You know, I'm 31. These will be around for hundreds of years on this lot if no bulldozers come. So really, really be mindful of that, and that reverence that you're creating these very long-term biological systems that you put all the pieces there. You know, you dump the puzzle box out and you put it together, and nature takes over. And starts weaving those connections you never knew possible. We're just, you know, co-creators, but overall, you still have to adapt and evolve with what nature gives you and how you interact with the system. So we're going to jump into guilds and species functions. This is a fruit tree guild, and what I mean by guild is just like those soil food web characters are all working together with the plant. On the surface, all these plants are working together. They're a plant community. Or a polyculture. So we have multiple plants performing different functions, all supporting one entity. So when you looked underground on this, on the roots, all that mycorrhizae fungi, which mycorrhizae has over 90% connections with all species on Earth, all plant species, all roots have a mycorrhizae friend, to say the least. So if you look underground, all these are connected in that soil food web, and they're all talking to each other. They're all sharing nutrients. They're all sharing minerals. This guy's got zinc. This guy's got calcium. This guy's got phosphorus. This guy's pumping nitrogen. This guy's drawing potassium from deep, deep down. So everybody's playing their part, and they're all working together. Nature works with cooperation rather than competition. This may look like a bunch of competition, and there may be some competition, but all the competition is towards a single goal of ecosystem resiliency and ecosystem unity. So we have our canopy, our fruit tree. We have a nitrogen fixing shrub. I use a Morpha fructosa. It's called false indigo. For some reason, there's another false indigo, which is a baptisma species, blue false indigo. I think they should change that name because I confuse people. But the false indigo shrub fixes nitrogen. We have a herbaceous layer. Maybe it's lavender or an herb. It's very fragrant. It's detecting, attracting predatory insects, and it's keeping away insects that might eat this, either the leaves or our fruit, because it's so fragrant. That could be garlics, that could be daffodils. You can see the daffodils around here. It's pest deterrents. We have food and nectar for our butterflies. We have kale in here. We have strawberries as our ground cover. There's just food anywhere and everywhere. And maybe we have some dynamic accumulators. There's some controversy with this term, but comfrey has a very deep root system, and it's been said that it brings up lots of nutrients. So The Fruit Tree Guild is essentially a plant community or polyculture or a guild that's all working together. And we use all those layers of the food forest and add it into one patch. So when we talked about patches on our access, we're really adding it all together here. And nitrogen is a key fertilizer for plants. So planting your nitrogen fixing trees, some plant species possess that ability to partner with microbes that take atmospheric nitrogen and they convert it into a form that's usable for plants. So you don't have to add any NPK, or you get your soil test back from the extension agency and they say you need 10, 10, 10, and you need this much lime. That's all BS in my opinion. I think the biology outweighs the chemical kind of reductionist stuff there, because that puts everything in a box and says this, this, this. It can't ever fathom the connections and the knowledge of natural systems and how nature does things. Not that I know anything about that, but I do know nature's been doing this a lot longer than us.
We have 2 questions in the Q&A.
Okay.
One from Cheyenne. How would you rejuvenate a completely shaded corner? Even weeds don't want to grow.
It depends. I don't know what's going on in the soil. I don't know if it's wet, if it's dry. I don't know if there's been chemical use there. I mean, that's really where that site assessment and that observation come in is really what's going on there. You'll hear me say that a lot, and a lot of permaculture says that is, it depends what's going on, what's going on there, what's growing, who's there, et cetera. So I would say do some site analysis, do some soil samples. There's a lot of biological labs, and you can do the chemical labs as well to see really what's going on. Add some cover crops, dig a soil test, and do your homework and get your hands dirty and see what's going on.
Tina Ordway asks, my boyfriend Mark wants to know if you know of any tree companies that are giving away mulch in this area.
I hunt down arborists, and I hunt down the tree companies. There's Aspen, there's Right Tree, there's you just got to Google them, and you can call them all you want, and they'll say, oh, I'll put you on the drop list. But I hunt them down. I passed out about 40 business cards this spring and got a hold of somebody from Aspen, and they dumped me 6 loads here at the house. But you got to be relentless and just hound those guys. If you see them near your house, just say, I want that mulch now, come drop it off, and give them $10, or just, you really got to hound those tree guys. I don't know of anyone that gives it for free besides the tree companies, because it's a waste product to them. And there is a caveat to that. I've been getting free mulch for a while, and I eliminated most of the Bermuda grass out of my yard when I started all this process, and then I brought it right back in with some mulch from a tree company, and I brought in some other invasives, and that I do it again just because that organic material is beneficial, but it's something to be weary about. And I mean, I've got a bunch of hedge apple and black locust in mulch before with big, big thorns that'll pierce your foot, pop your kids' bike tires. So it's free organic matter. I'm not complaining, but just be aware. But you got to hound those guys and just don't give up. Be relentless. And when you see them, just say, dump it out now. Maybe wear your COVID mask and a hat and just look intimidating. How
do you feel about sawdust? Because there might be some like woodworkers that might have some sawdust, but then again, the wood might be treated with stuff.
Yeah, sawdust is really, it's good for like if you have a nursery or something. But you really want ramial wood chips. That's finely shredded, diverse chips of all different types of material. And you really want hardwood species. If you get a lot of cedar, you'll have spruce, or a lot of things with tannins, or, cedars doesn't break down that fast. So it might be good for your path, but it might not be great for your trees, and blah, 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 blah. Sawdust, is more spongy. It holds a lot of water, and it could,
mold.
Yeah, it can drown your trees and kill them by creating an anaerobic layer. But it's good for if you're starting a nursery and you want bare root trees to kind of stick them in there and have a real light surface that when you're ready to move them to their permanent home, you just pull them up in the winter and move them. You know what I mean?
Right on.
I still got 20 something slides, so I'm going to start pumping it. So this is a guild that most of us may be familiar with. This is Three Sisters Garden, corn, beans, and squash. The corn is the structure, it's our canopy. The beans are a nitrogen fixer and our climber, and the squash is our ground cover. So all three of these are working together and filling in different 3D architecture spaces, different light requirements, providing weed control, providing food. This is a simple annual example. Talk about nitrogen fixtures. Nitrogen, again, is a key fertilizer for plants. We've got some white clover here. This is a gumi. It's an edible fruit. It's in the autumn olive family. This gumi's sweet scarlet and tulamok are two that we have in our yard. They are not invasive like the autumn olive, but they are delicious and they fix nitrogen, and they're a pioneer shrub. So you plant this right next to your fruit tree. It's fixing nitrogen in your fruit tree while it's real little. And you're getting a crop while you're waiting for that tree to grow. Purple prairie clover, which is a native clover. This white Dutch clover is not, but I think it's still beneficial. White prairie clover and then the red purple clover as well, all fix nitrogen. Not all nitrogen fixers are created equal. Some produce way more nitrogen than others. These white prairie clover. Sorry, there's purple, white. White prairie clover fixes the high amount of nitrogen. Eric Tonsmeyer, if you Google this, all nitrogen fixers are not created equal. He has a whole list of, it's all in the Latin, so it's kind of hard to understand. But the white prairie clover is a high nitrogen fixer. This is that false indigo I was talking about, Amorpha fructosa. It's a native almost everywhere in the country. It's considered invasive in the New England and a noxious weed in the Northwest, but it's all over here in native riparian areas in Missouri. It wants a good amount of sun. So this is a pawpaw right here, little baby guy. It's a NC1 pawpaw cultivar. So the false indigo is fixing nitrogen to this whole area, and it's providing shade while this pawpaws grow in shade in nature. They're an understory plant. But eventually when this pawpaw gets big, I'll cut this false indigo down. All that nitrogen will be released. It's called coppicing. So every 5 years, I'll cut it down and get a new growth to it. And this pawpaw will then take over and be the main centerpiece of this patch here in my yard. Talk about some perennial veggies instead of garlic and onions and things like that. You can eat walking onions and Welch onions. You can eat chives and garlic chives. These are all perennial. Same thing with perennial veggies, dandelion greens, stinging nettles. There's definitely some precautions to take with the nettles, but they are very nutrient dense things. The gloves and making sure you're not getting that poison that they emit and cooking them down properly. Caucasian spinach, there's Salvetta arugula, there's sorrel. Instead of broccoli, there's sea kales and Turkish rockets and sweet cicely. So all these are perennial vegetables. That's not saying to get rid of your onions and your broccoli and your spinach. It's just saying you can add more diversity to your system in case your annual spinach crop bolts. You don't have any spinach, you have all these other backup plants. You designed redundancy into your system and it's more resilient. So this is our backyard food forest here. This is our zone 3 per se. This is year 5 or something. I'm going to click this and it's going to tell you what everything is. But we have a prairie planting we just installed this year along the entire edge, the tall grass prairie. 5 to 6 foot tall, full of native wildflowers, Indian grasses, buffalo grasses, big bluestem, little bluestem, prairie dropseed. It's got echinaceas and tons of native prairies. So we have that as a perennial buffer, attract insects and insectary and predatory insects and birds and caterpillars and bees and everything of that nature. We have an Arkansas black apple on MM 111 rootstock. There's sunburst hazelnuts, Asian pears, another apple, another giant pear. We have a small nursery here. This is that giant walnut. So this shades everything up to about this point where my cursor is. You can see our access roads cutting through and creating all these little patches. I change these. I inoculate our mulch with cover crops of buckwheat and daikon radishes and clovers and a big hodgepodge of cover crop mixes. And then we move our chickens with this electric fence when those start to go to seed, and we let them scratch it all up, and they they do all the work for us and really create soil fast. Well, we have some blueberries. There's a Pennsylvania golden pawpaw, Nikita's gift persimmon, aromatic sumac, mulberry, another apple, hazelnuts, pawpaws, cherries. We have a little wetland guild here with all sorts of native wetland plants, apples. We store our mulch up here in this northeast corner, high in the landscape, so I can gravity feed it down. The slope goes this way. So I fill it up with a wheelbarrow and I can reach everything without exerting too much effort and using gravity for our side, on our side. But this kind of just gives you an overview. This is year 5, so we're in that kind of, we're just starting to get fruit and things are starting to take off. This is our east. This is full shade. See the black walnut here? So everyone talking in shade, we have black walnut here, elderberries, black cherry. There's some red buds, native pawpaw. There's a Kentucky champion pawpaw, shagbark hickory, more pawpaw. I love pawpaw. Red buds. We have some red light currants and gooseberries that grow really well in the shade. It's mulberries growing in the shade. And then for our ground covers, we have hostas, ostrich ferns, May apples, Jacob's ladders, Christmas ferns, and violets. And there's cover crops intermixed between those as well. But full shade, black walnut guild right here. So here is Nikita's gift persimmon. It's covered around by mints, apple mints, and yarrows and comfreys. I'll take the weed eater or the scythe. I'll chop all this down and let it rot, and they'll pop right back up. There's some Jerusalem artichokes, a serviceberry. Over here we have a jujube, strawberry ground cover, St. John's wort. There's figs, there's strawberries, there's chives, there's onions, there's echinacea, there's yarrow. And, it's just chaos, right? But there's so much diversity here that we won't go hungry. Something I do want to mention about fruit trees is the rootstock. This is very, very important that you need to identify the right rootstock for your tree. You can't go to Lowe's or Home Depot. You really need to go to a qualified nurseryman. In the Google Drive, I have a lot of people, but Guy Amos of Amos Orchard and Nursery down in Fayetteville is a specialist for apples and pears in the Ozarks. There's Cliff England of nuttrees.net in Kentucky with a whole array of these, but you really got to pick the right scion, which is the right cultivar, and you got to pick the right rootstock. I do this mostly the semi-vigorous and the vigorous MM111. I do a heavy prune. You can get standard apple stock. This is all apple rootstocks, but 50-foot tree, 30, 40-foot tree, 20-foot tree. These dwarf rootstocks, they only last a few years, 5 to 10 years, and then they die out. So be very selective whenever you buy a fruit tree. And anytime somebody asks me a question, I go, well, what rootstock's it on? Because that controls the entire vigor and growth of the tree. There are some vigorous scions, so this is another guild example. We have a Red Haven peach, a McKinsey aronia, our chokeberry, damson plum. There's elderberries all along here on the edge, Bob Gordon and Ranch, Santa Rosa plum, black mammoth twig apple. There's hazelnuts over here. We have all these understory chip plants of Joe Pye weed, river oats, long-headed coneflower, yarrow, comfrey, burdock, blue indigo, shining blue star. So you can just see, and this is a swale, so the water comes here, percolates in, and it self-waters this area. Again, from another side, you can kind of see the diversity in the system. These are all still kind of small, but you really want to fill every space you can and provide enough space for them to grow to maturity. This is that lot in St. Louis I talked about earlier. He's got an Asian persimmon. He's got a pawpaw here. He's got figs. He's got herbs and hibiscus. There's some flowers here, but it's a tiny, I don't know how many square foot his lot is. It is really little. This is the Rogers Community Food Forest, Rogers in North Springfield. You can see it's still pretty young. This is 2 years old. We already have fruit producing on our Korean pears here. We had a lot of vandalism on this side, unfortunately, so we're going to be adding some more of the layers. You don't have to do this all at once, and I wouldn't recommend it. Plant in layers and plant with what your budget and your labor allows. So we'll jump into the implementations and phases of development. The earthwork should be completed first, and then pioneer planting should be done immediately during the rainy season following the earthworks. So after you make a disturbance in the landscape like this, you want to seed it heavy with whatever your ground cover is. So the Bermuda or whatever, you get a jump start on nature and you plant before she does. So you want to usually use grafted fruit trees. You can plant from seed as well. But after, get your fruit trees established first and then start with your canopy and go down. Some people do go the other way, and that's fine too. But it takes a long time for fruit trees and nut trees to come into production. So, some are 3 years, some are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. So really think about that generational gap and what you're gonna harvest, if that's berries or vegetables in between that time. Get out there. There's something called permablitzes where you just get a big group of friends, make a potluck, and get some lemonade and water jugs out there and just plant them all. Line it all out. You can see this person here is using a rope or a hose and some lime dust to just kind of play with it. Really mark out your beds before you ever do it. Use equipment if necessary for scale. We planted 40 apple trees earlier this spring, and the client had a backhoe, so we used it. I mean, I've planted a lot of pickaxe, shovel, broad fork holes, and machinery can be used for regenerative good. Use small children, get them involved, get that relationship with the land. This is a big planting we did this spring. And we'll jump into the implementation of, we really want to smother the weeds and get a sterile seed base if we can. So this is sheet mulching. I'll talk about that in 2 seconds. So I talked about tilling is killing. There is an exception. It's when you're starting a bed. And if you already don't have life in your soil, you're not going to hurt it anymore by loosening up and getting it prepped for long-term resiliency and guild. So you can till once and then never do it again, and get things it's a jump start, it's a catalyst, and it's a tool that can be used for good or bad. Same things, I talked about the chickens earlier and the fencing, the electric fencing, that I'll throw some scratch out here, they'll scratch it all up, and then I'll move them and I'll plant behind them. So they scratch, they peck, they poop, and they fertilize this whole area, and once they go out, they took out a lot of the weeds and things, and I'll go in and plant directly after them. So earthworks access, remove vegetation, planting. If you've never heard of sheet mulching, it's a valuable thing if you have excess cardboard. There's a lot of waste materials in an urban area. Essentially what we're doing is making some lasagna. We have a thin layer of compost, our manure, we slash the vegetation, we smother it. So this is existing grass, compost, cardboard. I do 2 layers. I don't really use this method anymore, but it definitely works. And then you can use straw or leaves or grass clippings or mulch or whatever bedding you have on site. But really to smother the weeds, that's the goal. The triple threat of mulch is that we build soil, we retain moisture, and we prevent weeds. You can see here we have some giant pieces of cardboard. This whole area is mulched again. And I brought in mulch from a tree company, and it had winter creeper in it. So now I have to, you can't win sometimes. You got to take with what you got. But sheet mulching is valuable, especially for smaller yards or smaller faces, to really get a jump start. This is I don't know if it's a new age, but weed killing suffocation method. You can use plastic and you can get those seeds to germinate and solarize it, or you can use a silage tarp and basically suffocate it. So these weeds germinate under the tarp. You leave them there for 3 weeks. You take the tarp off for a week. You let those new seeds germinate. You put it on for 3 weeks, and you just choke it all out. This is really good to do in the heat of summer. So right now, if you're thinking about establishing something for a fall planting, this is a real non-labor intensive method to do it. Choke it all out. It's good for Bermuda grass. You go about 5 to 6 foot outside of where you think your planting will be, because that Bermuda grass will grow in, but silage tarps. And take it in stages. You don't have to do it all at once. Plant your trees first. Do what's best for you. If you plant it all at once, you might burn out. We're 5 years on this, and every spring and every fall I'm planting something. So there's plenty of time, and these things take time, so you can't do anything about it. So these are just some before and after pictures of our house. We bought this dilapidated janky house in West Springfield. We tore it all down by hand after we figured we couldn't save the structure. We built this new passive solar home, kind of tiny house here. You can kind of see this here was bare soil, compacted construction zone. Everything in the backyard was kind of dead and dirt and kind of urban wasteland. We mulched it heavily. We brought the chickens in, did the rotational chicken grazing, and we cover crop. This was the backyard. This was a pretty shoddy sheet mulching job. You can see all the euonymus on the fence line. Had a lot of invasives. Always take care of the invasives before planting, and try to eliminate as much competition and weeds as you like the Bermuda grass or any of those aggressive plants off the get-go, because once you get them in your polycultures and your guilds, they're there. So you can see this is all kind of, you know, we got the deck belt, still construction zone. This was only 3 years ago. So this was, you know, our succession of, we got some flowers growing and some shrubs and berries and raspberries and annuals. And this is this year. So you can see our elderberries and things are starting to grow up and get bigger, but we're fully from kind of wasteland construction to functioning ecosystem in 2 years is pretty awesome. And anybody can do it if you kind of follow these patterns. But yeah, you can kind of see some of this growth in here in the pawpaws and persimmons and a lot of the plants. This picture here especially, you can kind of see, I thought I put it in here. Oh yeah, right, come on, right here where my pointer is. You can see that area of the deck, wasteland. And now here we have echinacea and jujubes and figs. And I mean, these are producing. There's juneberries and Jerusalem artichokes and strawberries and chives and walking onions and honeyberries and lavender and milkweeds, and the list goes on. But this is just an example to show that what you can do in a short time period and really, you know, really get into gear. This is our backyard, and you can kind of see all those fruit trees at that angle. They're still very young. So recap: water management, access pathways, plant trees, plant guild companions, crush the weeds, and we want to accept feedback and maintenance. So maintenance, yeah, I mentioned this earlier that people say food forests are no maintenance, no inputs. That's BS. There's always work. The work's just different, and it's less labor intensive than a lawn. And you're getting food out of it. You're getting habitat. You're getting medicine. You're getting fiber. You can get fuel. However you design it, you get a lot more out of it than you put in. It's regenerative. The lawn, you just cut the lawn. You use fossil fuels. You use oil. You use labor. You have sweat equity in it, and you get a lawn. So that's your thing, cool. But yeah, we're trying to heal, and we're trying to feed ourselves, and we're trying to build community. And I think that's done around food and creating healthy ecosystems. So maintenance. With baby pawpaws, you may need to shade. These are just examples. This is inoculating mycorrhizae compost tea into the root system of young fruit trees with a root feeder. So pumps this hose. It's got a nozzle, and it literally injects mycorrhizae compost tea into the root system. Bird netting is maybe something you want to invest in. We have a conflicting goal of attracting birds and wildlife, but I also want blueberries. So I need the net to keep out the birds and to keep out my children. This again, compost tea spraying with the foliar spraying, trying to inoculate all the leaves and the foliar. And you're going to harvest this one day. So plan for harvesting and the access, whether that's the mushrooms or the berries. That there is work involved, but the work is gratifying. You know, you go out and mow your yard, some people really dig it. But if I go out and I pick a handful of blackberries and blueberries and get breakfast in my yard and drink my tea and hear the birds, I mean, that's a better life to me. So pruning, more arboricultural guidelines of tree care and root care and disease care and learning about pests and complex ecosystems. There's a whole, that's something to be learned in maintaining your trees and your shrubs. And then how are you going to weed? You know, we use a little weed eater and just buzz everything around. We have a scythe as well, but while you're while these are little, you definitely want a heavy mulch, or when you're installing these systems, maintenance should definitely be on your mind. I can't stress that enough. So you're always going to be adding organic material. You're always going to be planting. You're always going to be adding mulch until, the first 3 to 5 years. So just be aware of all that. I'm not trying to sugarcoat anything. There is work involved, but it's good work. It's that Wendell Berry thing, that we are stewards of the earth, and it's a pleasure and a joy to do this kind of work. Accept that action and feedback. Again, with those false indigos, we can chop them down and they'll fix nitrogen and they'll pop back up. But we'll go through, you can see the compre and the yarrow. I just chop it down and let it die there. That's mulch, and all the nutrients that the compost brought up, they die and decay and go right back to my fruit tree. So I slash and burn, basically just wipe it all out. You want to be mindful of when you do this seasonally. You don't want to do it on a hot summer day. You could kill your plant. So be smart and mindful of what's going on. We're running out of time. I definitely went over, but some of these fruits for the Ozarks, we got all sorts of southern black apple, Guy Amos, Amos Orchard and Nursery in Fayetteville, currants, Korean pears, service berries, aronia, black currants, all sorts of mulberry cultivars. This is the Illinois elderbearing, the size of your thumb, big, juicy, delicious fruits that produce from June to August. June to August. Elderberries, gooseberries, Asian persimmons, American persimmons, jujubes, pawpaws, hazelnuts, chestnuts, Montmorency cherries, black walnuts, blackberries, raspberries. I can go on and on forever. Take a screenshot of this. These are some of the best books. Gaia's Garden is great for introduction to this method. Edible Forest Garden is the opposite. It's like the professional, make your eyes glide over. But a lot of these are great introductions to food forests and farming and edible forest gardens, whatever you want to call it, mimicking those natural ecosystems. And the same thing, if you want to just, these have a link to them. But some final thoughts: plant with purpose, observe and interact, design in holes. What rootstock is it on? Buy from a reputable nursery, no Home Depot, no big nursery stock that orders it from far out in Oregon or New York and just resells it. Find someone that knows the cultivars. Talk to Patrick Byers of the Extension Agency and talk to him about the Mount Vernon Fruit Experimentation Station and view some of that literature. Get on that Google Drive and look at some of the nurseries I have listed there, more permaculture-centric nurseries, and really focusing on roots. Forest Keeling is a great nursery outside of Ellsbury, one of the best in the nation. How disease resistant is it? What's the rootstock? When does it bloom? What's its pest life cycles? Water needs, sun needs, pruning, mulching, pH, plant natives with high production cultivars. So this native piece, when we plant food forests, make sure we keep, we're nourishing the native population as well. This is all in our yard. We got some robins growing in some of our fruit trees. We got some bumblebees on our blueberries and some spiced swallowtail on our pawpaws. So last quote: sitting at our back doorsteps, all we need to live a good life lies about us. Sun, wind, people, buildings, stones, sea, birds, and plants surround us. Cooperation with all these things brings harmony. Opposition to them brings disaster and chaos. I'm pretty sure our civilization and society is in that latter, disaster and chaos. Be happy to debate that. But yeah, any questions, concerns, criticisms? Thanks for hanging in here for this long 2 hours. I'd be happy to answer any questions and stay as long as I need to.
Yeah, this is great. So we have a bunch of questions, and there are a bunch coming in. In the Q&A, we have a question from Katie Gaspard. What type of fig works well here?
There's two actually that work well here. I have had a lot die, but Chicago Hardy and brown turkey are the only ones that I've had success with growing outside and have come back. I put them in a microclimate facing south with some thermal mass, so they're surrounded by big heavy rocks and they're surrounded by like concrete foundation. but they're the only two that have survived. And I neglect these plants. I'm not out there babying them. So if they don't hang, they don't hang, and I don't want them. I practice Mark Shepard's philosophy of sheer and utter neglect. So I do all my homework and research. I plant the good rootstocks. I plant the right scions and cultivars. And if it doesn't hang, I don't try to make it hang on. If it's meant to be here, it will be here. If it's not, it won't. And I plant a lot of cultivars from the south because our climate zones are changing and we're getting a hotter, we're dropping down to zone 5 maybe in the next 5 to 10 years. So I've been looking at a lot of cultivars that are in North Texas and Arkansas and even the Southwest. I've done a lot of trainings in the southern climates to try to learn about their ecosystems and try to get the jump on some of these climate shifts and have more adaptability. But brown turkey, Chicago hardy.
Great on.
Next
Curtis,
question. I know Curtis Millsap has a bunch of figs growing, but he has them in a greenhouse and things, and they get a little more care than mine.
Is it true the wasp thing? Is that true with figs?
One more time.
The whole wasp. I don't know if it's a rumor, but or a theory, but don't wasps go into figs and then die into the fruit?
I mean, I guess they could, but I've never experienced that. Like when you bite into a fig, there's a wasp.
Yeah, I've heard something like that. Really similar to like the spotted Drosophila fly in raspberries, kind of similar.
Yeah, I think that gets to your predatory insects and having that holistic ecosystem they're preying on those things. Or maybe if you eat a fig with a wasp in it, it's a protein and sweet.
Extra protein, yeah.
Yeah. Just don't think about it.
Victoria Dudekin says, if you want to grow most of your own food, do you incorporate annual garden into your food forest, or do you have a separate garden for that?
So we talked about all those herbaceous plants, tomatoes and garlic and peppers. We have all those incorporated with our fruit trees in our front yard food forest and around our backyard food forest. We're actually in the process. If I can find, you can still see my screen, can't you?
Yeah.
We're actually in the process of creating a more intensive market garden for production for those other crops separate. It depends what your goals are. If I'm looking to create a complete ecosystem, I'm going to do the food forest method. If I want to grow a crap ton of annual crops, I'm going to do a market garden. So different system, different principles and things like that, but the food forest is surrounding that market garden. Here it is. So if you look here, you can kind of see that we have the prairie planting. We have all these fruit trees on our northern side, making a sun trap. And then this whole area here is annuals. If you can see that. Yeah, this whole area here will be the market garden.
And then this is pretty topical. Another question is, where do you get most of your fruit trees?
Forrest Keeling, Guy Amos in Fayetteville, Amos Orchard and Nursery. Cliff England, nuttrees.net. He's in Kentucky. We've been ordering scions and grafting our own. There's also Burnt Ridge Nursery. If you get the Google Drive link, I got a whole list of nurseries in the nation. I focus on local nurseries that have nurserymen or women that are basically just, it's not a big corporation. It's not a big, there's a lot of nurseries. I would say 90% of nurseries, maybe more. Like, I'm not going to name any names, but if you go into a nursery in Springfield and you say, oh, I want this, a fruit tree, they probably bought it from some wholesale nursery that doesn't care about the roots, can't tell you what rootstocks it's on, and they sell it. And it may not be disease resistant for our area. So find those people that I mentioned, like, grow these things and have a holistic regimen. They're not spraying, they're not doing things of that nature. And you pick the right cultivar first, and you'll set yourself up for more success for sure.
Awesome. And then we have a couple more questions. Greg Sweeten asks, where do you get your cover crops?
Cover crops you can get from Green Cover Seeds, I believe is the name. They're out of Nebraska. I also get green cover seed. Yeah, green cover seed. Right here. They're out in Nebraska. You can also Nixa Hardware down south has a pretty good seed selection, and they can order a bunch of organic seeds for you. They're definitely more expensive, and then they have all the other seeds. So kind of depends on your budget. You're going to mow them down anyway. Some of them are inoculated, and some of them are like Monsanto seeds, so I would avoid those ones. But Nixa Hardware has a great selection locally, and then Green Cover Seed is probably one of the best in the nation.
Awesome. Abby Vera asks, where is the Google document you kept mentioning? Thank you. So we
in the
have,
cloud.
Yeah, so we have everyone's email through Zoom, because if you're attending this Zoom, you had to register. And when you registered, you inputted your email. So we have everyone's email, and we will be emailing everyone the Google Drive information. So that's a great question. Thank you for that. Another question. We're converting Bermuda into flower meadows with solarization. Cool. Is there a Missouri plant that is parasitic to grass roots in the same way that the yellow rattle works for British meadow conversion? That's a good question.
Yeah, I wish I had an answer for that. And if you have something that would be parasitic to Bermuda grass and the rhizomes that it emits, that would be awesome. I don't have an answer for that, unfortunately. I would say that the solarization and choking it out is the best thing, and then seeding it hard. If you're a flower meadow, I would look at Prairie Moon Nursery. They have a great tutorial of transforming into a prairie planting, and planting those seeds in winter so they can cold stratify in late December or January, and you'll have high success, and you can cover crop it with a winter wheat or something to contain erosion and things like that. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a great answer on that one.
I just wanted to circle back to the question in regards to Black and brown advocates for food systems and diversity in permaculture. I wanted to recommend a book called Farming While Black by Leah Penniman. It's Soulfire Farm's Practical Guide to Liberation on the Land. That was recommended by the co-founder of Springfield Community Gardens. Yeah, there are a lot of really great resources out there in regards to diversity while in permaculture. Let's see, more. If you have any other questions, feel free to enter them in the chat.
Looks like we have a few. Justin Dreyer. I did not speak about urine and human manure. I would recommend utilizing your urine and like putting straw in a bucket and peeing in the bucket, and then spreading it to all your different fruit trees. Don't do the same tree. Cycle through regenerative grazing style or rotational urine distribution. But urine, I mean, it has all the nutrients and nitrogen and things that your body's flushed out, and it's a powerful tool. I would say the same thing for human manure, but that's my daughter just.
Disaster.
Yeah, but we have something called fecal phobia in this country, where human manure is kind of frowned upon. So that's a whole nother conversation, but I would advocate for
human manure is an actual term?
Yeah, human manure, it's using human waste you compost your own waste, but you can't eat McDonald's and take antibiotics and do all that stuff. Yeah, you have to have healthy poop.
Yeah, the whole time you were showing what was it? Was it the mushroom system? I was thinking of our gut biome and how similar our gut biome is to the ecology.
Yeah, that repeating pattern is interesting when you step out and look at it as a whole. It's pretty fascinating.
So on the topic of poop, what about dog poop? Can you use dog poop for compost?
I would not. Dog poop and cat poop have high amounts of E. coli and all sorts of. I mean, what's in their feed, and how do their guts work? So, the only poop I would use is either rabbit, chicken, or ruminants. So that's llamas, cows, goats. They have 4 stomachs, so it processes 4 times. And you get a healthier lactobacillus and all, you know, we can get into the weeds on anything, right?
Justin Dreyer also says, I'm in Mountain Grove on a wet flatland with lots of perennials. I'm working on replacing the grass with a food forest. Thank you for sharing your consciousness. It was very inspiring. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, check out if it's super wet and you have a lot of room, pecans and black walnuts. Really like those wet spots. And they'll be around for a long time. And not only food, but I mean, if you ever had to cut it down, you have timber, you have, you know, you leave your great-grandchildren with a lot of options when things go south or if they go south.
Okay, we got another question in the, we got a question in the Q&A, but it's more of a statement. Justin Dreyer linked the humanurehandbook.com.
Yeah, it's a great book. It's a great book, but you're getting deep into the permaculture, which I agree. We'd be good friends if your mind's there. But I live in the city. If I'd have to have like a covert humanure operation because you're required to have city sewer in the city. So
yeah. So I'm going to finish with this question. Tyler Uli asks if there's a recording of the webinar available, and wanted to make sure he was on the list for the doc. So if you are watching this right now, you have registered through Zoom, and we have your email on a list, and we will be emailing everyone who has been on this Zoom a, oh, that's a good point though. This will be recorded. It'll be recorded and it'll be on Facebook. So if you're watching this as a recording, unfortunately, we don't have your email. We only have the email from the live attendees. So if you're watching this from Facebook recording, feel free to email us on Facebook with your email, and we'll be happy to share the Doodle document with all of the resources. But if you're currently watching this right now, you'll be receiving that email shortly after the Zoom.
yeah, I'll pull up my email one more time here, Ozark Mountain Permaculture at Gmail. And we do offer consultations and things. We've kind of moved out of the implementation stages with our children. But I mean, we'd always be happy to help and work something out. So shoot us an email if you have any questions or anything. I'm slowly scrolling. Here it is.
I also wanted to mention that this workshop is provided by grants made by the USDA through Springfield Community Gardens. And the way that we can continue doing this for free is by filling out the survey at the end of this workshop. And we will also be able to gather data from that and do more workshops in the future. So please do that.
Awesome. Yeah, this is what that resources looks like, kind of. This is my personal one. I don't know my password to my business account, so I'll figure that out. But yeah, I mean, tons of resources: how trees affect soils, biological regeneration, gardening with nature, soil science, riparian wetland soils. These are edible perennials for our area for an attractive landscape. I mean, there's tons of stuff in here. Here's that resource page: Amos Orchard, Burnt Ridge, plant nurseries. You know, all these are nurseries. Planting tips, where to buy water management stuff, you know, all sorts of. I could overwhelm you, so I'll just give it to you, and you can go from there. Appreciate everybody taking the time to hang out with this webinar. Reach out if you have any questions or need more assistance. We'd be happy to help. And shout out to USDA and Springfield Community Gardens for making this all possible. So
awesome. Thanks so much, Ben.
Yeah.